Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real privilege for me to be here as the moderator this morning of this very important panel that is going to discuss the role of Indigenous women as human rights defenders. And we are going to listen to the experiences and perhaps the recommendations from three very important women human rights defenders whom I very much respect. As a prelude to the panel discussion, let me start off by saying that this discussion really hits at the core of gender relations. It also hits at the core of patriarchy. I think that traditionally, it is very much unheard of for a woman to be a human rights defender, because it is only men who can be in the military, it is only men who can be in the armed forces. And if, as a woman, you claim to be a human rights defender, it means that you are taking on the traditional responsibilities of men. Women are supposed to be silent, women are supposed to be obedient, and women are supposed to be passive. And it is the men who have to do the job of defending, particularly the defense of land rights. But why are we here this morning? We are here this morning because we want to reaffirm the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which accords to both men and women the right to freedom of expression, freedom of information, and freedom of occupation. And for Indigenous women, this is even more affirmed by the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. I'm not sure if our viewers have also heard about another important declaration. Of course, we have the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, but there's also a declaration on the rights of human rights defenders. So this morning, we are here to reinforce all these normative frameworks and to inform the world that Indigenous women are not going to keep quiet. They are going to assert their roles and responsibilities as they deem fit. So this morning, I'm extremely happy to have with us three women, and I would like to start off with Tarcila Rivera Zia, who is a founding president of the Center for Indigenous Cultures of Peru, an association that for 30 years has promoted the affirmation of identity and recognition of the rights of Indigenous peoples. She is a vice chair of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues and is one of the founders of the Continental Network of Indigenous Women of the Americas and the International Indigenous Women's Forum, FIMI. Both of these are important networks that promote leadership and political participation of Indigenous women around the globe. She has also been strongly engaged in climate change-related negotiations for the rights of Indigenous peoples. So, Tarcila, this morning, we are really happy to have you here. We would like you to share with us your experiences as a human rights defender. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity. As you can imagine, we as Indigenous women, we need to struggle defending our rights from where we were inside our mothers. After that, as a girl, and in the specific condition of Indigenous women or girl, far from the cities, far from the opportunities, in societies where all our culture, knowledge, language were historically excluded, not included in the national policy. personally, I think I began struggling from the beginning. But I have knowledge or conscience about that from 10 years old. I finished my primary and secondary school working at home, like as a domestic worker or something like that. But my priority on that time was to learn how to write and how to read. Finishing the secondary school, I tried to see the world and began to work as in the public issue. No? After, I think, 25 years old, I tried to see the society, the formal, and my community. It's really until now that our children and boys finish the secondary school as indigenous, and they don't know how is to be a citizen and not indigenous. Because we have the constitution, no, national constitution, that will recognize the pluriculturality, multilingual, blah, blah, blah. But in the practice, we suffer racism. That was very bad situation. When we began to organize as indigenous women participating in the movement of indigenous people's reivindication from 70s, 80s, we tried to see to what is happening with women's movement and with our movement as indigenous people's movement, and where are we as women. After that, we, a small group, tried to learn between us and to share our experiences. That's why this kind of meetings or conferences is very important to exchange and to inspire one to another. On that time, we began to discuss about what's the conference for women, where are we? And we prepared as the region on 95 to go to Beijing because indigenous women are absent. But I had the privilege to went to Nairobi, where we were a few, maybe 12 indigenous women, some of them from English-speaker regions, no? And after that, we, in Beijing, we feel more strong between us because all the experiences from different parts of the world was put in the global arena. And from that, we had at the first declaration of indigenous women from Beijing. Now, as you know, we have a very long road, I think 40 years, but as indigenous women, I can talk about the last 30 years. We are very active in our proper right as women and as indigenous, but as member of our peoples and as member of the global society. That's why we defend not only, as you know, not only our individual rights, but collective rights. And until now, we understood that to defend the collective rights is not only for us, for indigenous peoples, it's for over the world. That's why we are more strong with different experiences, different point of view, but looking at the same point. We need to be respected as peoples, as women, as girls, as youth, as elders, because all of us have something to share, something to give to others. And we always receive from others too, and that's why we are part of the global actions for rights. That's my first.
Thank you. I'll definitely come back to you. And I just recall very fondly that Indigenous women prepared their own outcome document after the Beijing conference. Yeah. And I thought that was very inspiring. And it does demonstrate the tenacity of Indigenous women. We will not be content with mediocrity. And unless outcome documents, development processes reflect our rights and needs, we will not accept whatever is given to us just like that. So it is now with a deep sense of pride that I go to our next panelist, by name Kandi Mossett. She has emerged as a leading voice in the fight to bring visibility to the impacts that climate change and environmental injustice are having on Indigenous communities across North America. She is currently part of the Indigenous Environmental Network as the lead organizer on Extreme Energy and Just Transition campaign, focusing at present on creating awareness about the environmentally and socially devastating effects of hydraulic fracturing on tribal lands. I've never heard of this, wow. And working towards a just transition away from fossil fuel industry. Her local work is complemented by international advocacy work, including participation in several UN forums, as well as a testimony before the US Congress on climate change issues and its linkages with health, identity, and the well-being of tribal lands. Kandi, it's a great pleasure to have you here. Could you also tell us your experience as a human rights defender and how you would want to inspire the next generation of young women human rights defenders? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Hello to everybody that's watching and can't be here. I'd first like to introduce myself the way I do in my language. So I would say dosha maragoat marishi ma'a ishuia hets. In my Hiradza language, I said hello relatives. My name is Eagle Woman. My English name is Kandi Mossett. I am a Mandan Hiradza Rikara woman from North Dakota, born and raised, and I think this all started as a result of just growing up on a reservation here in the United States. It was called the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation. In the United States, there are 568 federally recognized tribes and many more that aren't federally recognized. And so we've been fighting for over 500 years here in the United States for our rights against a genocidal government, genocidal system, I should say, around colonization. And I grew up surrounded by impacts of industry. Coal mining, there's uranium. Every single bit of our over 11,000 miles of rivers, lakes, and streams in North Dakota is contaminated with mercury. It was in 2006 that we started having hydraulic fracturing, and it really surprises me to hear that you haven't heard of fracking. There are over 30 states in the United States that are fracking, and then it's a worldwide problem as well. And all of these cumulative impacts have added up to our people being very sick. Children having asthmas and cancers. I myself am a cancer survivor. I was 20 years old when I was diagnosed with a stage 4 sarcoma tumor. And I shouldn't be here because of that. People that have stage 4 sarcoma tumors don't generally make it. And I thought it was normal because so many people around me had cancer. I've had friends that have died over the years from being sick. And I thought it was normal until I left the reservation and people told me it's not normal that so many of you are sick. And I thought, what? This isn't fair. That's when I started learning about human rights and how we have to defend ourselves. and be human rights defenders because nobody's going to do it for us. And I appreciate women like you, both of you, all of you that have done so much work paving the way over all these years and putting so much time and energy, because it is a heavy burden to bear. But I look at other women in other countries and I see the strength. And that gives me the strength to say, hey, we can do this collectively. That's why these forums are so amazing. We gain strength from each other as women, Indigenous women that are dealing with these toxic effects. Hydraulic fracturing uses so many chemicals and toxins. And I found out that out of all of these chemicals that are used, that are hazardous substances, there are only 26 that are regulated throughout their life cycle. And this is only the 1,500 that are considered hazardous chemicals. This isn't pesticides. This isn't radioactive materials. And I thought, what? How can this possibly be? Here we are as women trying to be mothers. I have a 4-year-old daughter. Trying to raise our children the best way we can. But when we're breathing in things from our air, we're eating food that's grown from our soil that's contaminated, drinking contaminated water. How is that possible where it's already contaminated while they're still in the womb? That is a human rights defense. That is a violation. That's violence against women. If we look at the many conventions, the Convention on the Rights of the Child, there's a clear mandate in there that children have a right to be protected from toxins, from chemicals, carcinogens. Article 24 in that convention clearly states that mandate. And yet, I heard from the Hazardous and Chemicals Convention's rapporteur, I'm probably saying it wrong, I'm sorry. I heard from him this past weekend that when he talks to environmental regulators, many of them don't even know about these conventions or these articles. And so when we look at the United Nations and we look at what can be done, we need to uphold and push these protections that may look separate. You know, it may look like it's a separate entity over here, but ultimately affects us as Indigenous women, as children. We have a right to thrive and survive from the womb and before we even come in and take our first breath. When we say water is life, we're literally talking about water being the first life of when we're in the womb. And so when I was asked to do this, I wanted to plead with the UN to look at these conventions and to actually enforce and uphold. I would like to push for something that happened 3 weeks ago, actually, in Sweden, where they have called for stronger, more robust, and legally binding obligations regarding chemicals and waste at the global level. And that's something that the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues can call for, because their mandate is going to be expiring in 2020. And so now is the time to make sure that we're protecting ourselves against these toxic chemicals, because we're hurting and we're dying. And it's a human rights abuse. It's violence against women. And that's why I'm here, to make my voice heard and say enough is enough. We're not taking this anymore.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The lives of Indigenous women and girls matter. And I wish to state categorically, I'm taken by emotion, so I wish to state categorically that the imposition of various development processes, such as extraction, have really stolen the health and the clean environment that Indigenous people had before. And this is a blatant violation of their rights. Many times when we define violence against women, we do so in physical, psychological, economic, and emotional terms. But when you add on another layer, which is environmental violence, then you know that we are moving towards a situation in which we could be wiping away a whole generation of women. Therefore, as UN Women, we take this very seriously. And I want Kandi to know that you're not alone. We stand by you. On this note, I wish to invite our third speaker, and it is my honor, deep honor, to introduce her. She has a lovely name. I wish I had a daughter that I could name with this. Binalakshmi. I love that name. Nepram. She's a humanitarian, an author, a female activist for the advocacy of gender rights and women-led disarmament movements, with the objective of arresting gun culture and bringing about peace for her home state of Manipur in the northern eastern part of India. She established organizations such as the Control Arms Foundation of India and the Manipur Women's Gun Survivors Network. Would you believe that Forbes named Nepram as one of its 24 young minds to watch out for in 2015? And the Action on Armed Violence of London listed her among the top 100 influential people of the world actively pursuing a reduction in armed violence. Aren't we fortunate to have you? So, Nepram, if you could tell us your experience as a human rights defender and what you would pass on to successive generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Beatrice, and thank you to the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous People for inviting us, and to fellow panelists. We cry with you. This week, we had in Colombia a conference on looking at environmental violence, and I have seen so many of our indigenous sisters crying. We have to keep crying, because it will give us strength. We've got to express the violence which has been there for almost hundreds of years on our bodies, in our minds, in our lives, in our present and future. So tears are not a sign of weaknesses. It's a sign to clear our thoughts so that we can prepare collectively for the future. So this. First of all, I would like to speak in my language, which is Manipuri. Yai paraba ayuksida April tang tarataret mayambu kurumjari. I pay my obeisance to every one of you who are here in this room and those who are watching us on UN TV for giving us this opportunity. I also recognize more than 200 women human rights defenders who have been killed last year, and many continue to live lives of threats, many of whom are indigenous women, including myself. I'm lucky to be alive, but many of our sisters have not survived the violence. I also pay obeisance to all my sisters, mothers, generations, Manipuri Meira Paibis, the Naga mothers, the Kuki mothers, women from Garo Hills, from Arunachal, Tripura, Chittagong Hill tracts, from our sisters from all over Asia and around the world, for whom we are here today. I come from Asia, which has 2/3 of the world's indigenous people, 270 million indigenous people. And in that part of Asia, I come from what is the current northeast of India, which has got one of the highest concentration of indigenous people. We have got over 200 indigenous communities in this Indo-Burma border region. I belong to the Manipur community, of the Meitei community, and we have been, and my women human rights defender, also as a disarmament activist, we've been working for over 15 years on trying to mitigate violence. Our area is the area which is home to South Asia's longest-running armed conflict. More than 50,000 people have died. Many of our brothers, our fathers, our children have disappeared. Extrajudicial killings, rape, murder of indigenous women in our territories is a reality for which, like my sister said, when you live in a conflict zone, we think it's normal. The bomb blast, the combing operations, the movement of our non-armed state armed groups, we think it is normal. But it is in this situation that I grew up. And we started working on mitigating. We started mapping arms proliferation, narco-trafficking. Many of our indigenous territories are heavily, heavily weaponized, militarized. Weapons from more than 13 countries have flooded indigenous areas of Northeast region. Now, because of this political conflict, many indigenous communities are being armed by state forces, and we started the process of killing brothers against brothers, sisters against sisters, because of state politics, which we condemn. We are violated in our own homes, in our market spaces. We don't have what is called normalcy in our lives. And that is why we set up the Manipur Women Gun Survivors Network to respond. It's a community of indigenous women. We are helping survivors of violence in the Indo-Burma border regions. We work in 300 villages. What I'm wearing today is woven by our women of Manipur. And we are trying to ensure economic livelihood so that even after violence, our women can get on with their lives with a newfound courage. So this is the work that we are doing all over. And then what we are also sensing is, as a woman human rights defender, many of us talk about this, and as we said, now, what does it take? What are the threats that we faced? We face threats, bodily harm, online threats. I have been told that what it costs to kill a women human rights defender. I was told that they could hire a politician in the northeast of India, told that in 30,000 Indian rupees, which is about $250, I can be killed for our work to defend our rights, our lands, our territories, our indigenous histories, our culture. This is the cheapness in which we, the women, indigenous women, human rights defenders, have been subjected. I'm here because of the work that we do. And not only me, many, I'm lucky to be surviving, but many indigenous women human rights defenders, they have given their lives. So my appeal in the end is about, and so many indigenous women defenders has been called as anti-nationals, they have been called as, anti-whatever. No, and many of our indigenous women human rights defenders, Imanganbi from Bishnupur district, was detained under the National Security Act by the government of Manipur and government of India. And she was in jail for 7 months. This is a level in which our brave mothers, indigenous women rights defenders, have been jailed for the work that they are doing to protect our lands, our rights, our indigenous histories and cultures. Now, what does the United Nations have got to do? My recommendation to the United Nations Permanent Forum as well as the UN bodies is 2013, the United Nations passed a landmark resolution on protecting women human rights defenders. And I was shocked and petrified that there's no mention of the indigenous women human rights defenders. My appeal to UN bodies is to please include this in women human rights defenders. The second, we have got many bodies like the United Nations Security Council 1325, the whole issue on rape in conflict areas, which is one of the major areas which we're struggling. Rape and trafficking of our indigenous women from northeast of India is a major issue. And the United Nations haven't got the courage to take it up on international body. We have got the case of Thangja Manorama, who was raped and killed by Assam Rifles in my home state. Compensation has been paid, but the rapists have not been. And finally, women human rights defenders, indigenous and non-indigenous both. There's no proper mechanism to protect us. My appeal is we need to have safe houses for our women. Ensure that when they are fleeing their territories for their safety and security, we should have mechanisms and resources. UN, organizations, and just basic individuals need to protect us. I have been in that situation myself. I know what I am talking about. It's extremely important to go beyond conferences, documents, and to ensure that women human rights defenders, and particularly women human rights defenders, are given the protection that they deserve.
Thank you very much for that passionate plea. And I would add that whatever kind of support is provided to women human rights defenders should take into account the intercultural differences, because we cannot have one approach for the protection of human rights defenders. So in these safe places, we would expect that those who manage such facilities would be aware and respect, advance, and fulfill the cultural needs of Indigenous women and girls. We have to be very conscious that those that I wouldn't want to say fighting against, but those that are against our fundamental human rights would want to adopt a policy of divide and rule. So as women, as Indigenous women, we need to be aware of that and continue to stick together. Mm-hmm. If there is time, is there time? I would like to ask another round of questions, beginning with Tarcila. The theme of this year's UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues is the collective rights of Indigenous peoples to lands, territories, and resources. How can we as Indigenous women position ourselves to reinforce these rights for us as well as our daughters?
I am very happy to mention that this year we are very strong as Indigenous women, taking our voice to denounce the persecution, the criminalization, the assassination of land defenders or natural resources defenders. Principally, as all of us know, are Indigenous women. Because for us, if we don't defend the land, the territory, and the resources, we can't talk about development and continuity of our cultures and peoples. In this situation, I think it's necessary to do more than the papers, like you said, because we have many recommendations from Permanent Forum, from other mechanisms, like Commission Status of Women, the recommendations, the CEDAW Convention, international instruments, no, that we pushed as Indigenous peoples, women, specifically as Indigenous women too. But we are discovering that it's necessary to develop our proper participation in the decision-making of our countries. Because who decide in our countries? We see that over the world, the war is appearing each day in our lives. Who decide about the peace in the world? We need to develop another kind of actions, I think, because we believe on peace. We believe on democracy. We believe in human rights, for not only for us. But what happened? I think it's necessary to go more about the analysis, for example, the economic power or empowerment of some sectors of the world or the society. How we can develop the dignity, condition with dignity for all in our societies. We are divided in the poorest countries, the poorest people, the poorest sectors who decide what happened in our place. And we are dying defending that our rights and the rights of others. Because if we think only, for example, with the testimony of our sister, if the uranium or the gold finish, what happened with our life? We need to to see and to try to influence with our proper ideology and philosophy to contribute to the global arena. We in these days, as you know, we are trying to revise as permanent forum how efficient are the mechanisms where we work during our last 40 years here in the United Nations system. We have 3 specific mechanisms: the MRIP in Geneva, here the Permanent Forum, and our special rapporteur. The special rapporteur made a very good work, but including she is persecuted with criminalization of as human rights defenders. Where we go and with whom we can talk and to be understand. I believe sincerely as individual person and as a woman and as indigenous that we need to be listened by governments, by politicians, the people who decide the policy of the world, principally about the economic development, taking account the Agenda 2030, because in other case, the human rights and the understanding between us will be worse. It's not possible to continue in this situation.
Thank you. I was at a side event yesterday at which I learned that, and I knew this before, but this was reinforced, that when extractive industries exploit the land, the resources that emerge from that process are not even used to benefit indigenous communities. No, it doesn't. So
we are in the poorest sector.
Exactly. You are sitting on the richest land, but the resources are not used to develop the communities. So Kandi, coming from Northern America, a young girl in a primary school in Saskatchewan may find it hard to understand why you will be fighting for your land rights. How would you explain that to a girl, a very young girl?
I think that it's just important to explain human rights in general. An understanding of our connection with the land. As a Native person, Indigenous person here, we have this traditional ecological knowledge, they call it, here in the UN forums. To me, I call it common sense. It's this connection that we have where we're from, our stories, our oral traditions. Mm-hmm. I explain that when I look out on a landscape and I see the gently rolling hills, this is in North Dakota, I'm not seeing just the landscape, I'm actually seeing a song. Mm-hmm. I'm seeing a story that was told. And through my work with the Indigenous Environmental Network and the United Nations forums around the world, I've been able to meet so many women and girls that have told me their stories of their struggle for land and land rights. And it's horrifying that women can't even have access to title of land, let alone having the land, though we're supposed to have all these roles as women. We're supposed to be, cooking or taking care of children. We're not supposed to own land. And that's backwards. And the problem with our knowledge, our traditional ecological knowledge, is that right now, today, in 2018, the balance is gone. The only way that we can move forward is to balance everything in our lives. And this includes the balance of power between men and women, which is totally off the scales right now. That's the problem. It's not that women are saying, we want to take over the world. We want and deserve and need, if we are to save ourselves as humanity, equality. Because that is what will bring us back into the proper circle that we should live in as humanity. And it's not just reflective upon a person that lives in a particular area. It's around the world. And people, young people, old people, babies, need to have a voice, need to speak up, and need to understand that this is real. There's a problem with information sharing. Knowledge is power, and that's why they try to keep that knowledge away from us. They try to keep us busy with other things, television or whatever have you. Here in the U.S., I can speak to these experiences. And not the very important, fundamental, basic human rights of the right to not only survive, but the right to thrive. And it begins in the womb and before. So we need to understand that there's a real power struggle, and we need to make sure that our voices are being effectively heard, and it starts with information and knowledge.
Thank you very much. Bina, if I may ask you this question. Sure. You spoke about the militarization of your community.
Yes.
What is the intersection between militarization and land rights? How do they impact one another?
Absolutely. These are absolutely, it's all about, the colonization process of our lands, our culture, our language, our histories. Can you imagine the history of 45 million, many of which are indigenous in Northeast India, are not in the textbooks of the world's largest democracy, India. Mm-hmm. So it's about colonizing in every aspect, our language. Mm-hmm. If you speak our native language, we are fined in our schools. We can't sing our songs. Our native religion is worshipping the rays of sun and moon. We are told to be Hindus or any other culture. So every aspect, from our minds, our hearts, our lands, it's all about colonization. Yes. And militarization is the highest form of colonization, a brutal colonization, which has been there in the northeast of region since 1958. We have a martial law called the Armed Forces Special Power Act since the last 60 years in the world's largest democracy. So this is absolutely important. Just to come back to what my sister said, indigenous people live, we are just 5% of the world's population, but we are 15% of the world's poorest. Yes. You see the words of our sisters here, and the words of our mothers, indigenous mothers of Manipur or Karbi Anglong or many of this indigenous area. The words of our indigenous women, our mothers, are the strongest I've ever heard in my life. They are not tainted by any projects or politics. They are strengthened by the deep connect with nature, land, and rights that they are crying to protect in behalf of all of us, indigenous as well as non-indigenous. It is in them that the future of Mother Earth lies. We should not forget that. And it's very important that what Kandi also spoke about, the unequal power. Men own 99% of the world's properties. Women own only 1%, out of which indigenous women would have been 0.0001% probably. So it's absolutely unequal distribution. As I said, indigenous people live in 80% of the world's biodiversity hotspots. So I think the future of not just indigenous communities, but the future of the world, it's important that nations, policymakers, civil society, we need to wake up and honor the struggles of our indigenous women, brothers, sisters, who have tried to make this better for each one of us.
Thank you. Yeah. My sincere thanks to Tarcila, Kandi, and Bina for their passionate presentations and appeal to the UN Permanent Forum. This panel has exposed that we need to adopt a life cycle approach to the rights of indigenous women. We need to adopt a life cycle approach to the rights of indigenous women because our rights are violated from the time of conception. And we need to protect all women from environmental degradation because it is a form of violence. Many diseases have emerged from this, and yet very little visibility has been given to these situations. they are very shocking and unacceptable. And it is my hope that the UN Permanent Forum will give visibility to these issues and also include a recommendation in the outcome document. I'm going to actually take personal responsibility for preparing a paragraph as a summary of this panel discussion, and I'll share it with the esteemed panel members. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you have all learned a lot. Let us not give up. Let us continue the struggle. It's a long road, but eventually we'll get there. Thank you very much.
Matigirat, thank you. Decolonize your minds.
Thank you so much.